Hi, it's Milla, and as you can probably already tell, today's video is going to be a little bit different, very different actually. Instead of vlogging or talking about secondhand clothes for an hour, today I'm going to be talking about books. If you know me, as I mentioned in my last video, books have been the longest love affair of my life. I have read some amazing novels and nonfiction works this year, which is a new one for me. So today is going to be the best and the worst books that I read this year. And I just want to preface this with a little disclaimer. I, in some way, enjoyed every single book that I read this year, and the books that I'm going to be talking about as the quote-unquote worst ones are not horrible. They're still worthy of reading, but they're just the ones that I enjoyed the least, especially in contrast with some of the amazing books that I read this year. So I guess without further ado, here are the best books that I read this year. So the first book that I read this year is something really different for me. As I alluded to before, I am a fiction lover through and through, and I will hardly ever read nonfiction unless otherwise prompted to. But I really wanted to challenge myself in the year 2023. So the first book that I read was Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. This book is a, quote, anthropological masterpiece, end quote, documenting the history of the human race from its inception to its possible end. So essentially this book is like a biography of humanity. It tells all of our story in a way that's actually quite witty, and I really felt like it was a story. I thought this book would bore me to death, and I was only reading it so I would seem intellectual. I will be fully honest with you. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. It actually had me laughing out loud, which I cannot believe I'm saying that, but it's really fascinating. It's not supposed to be a book solely of fact. It's supposed to be a story, even if it is nonfiction. And I found it very easy to separate fact from his own personal feelings. I genuinely would recommend this book if you want to seem like an intellectual and you want to seem 10 times smarter than you actually are. But it is so digestible and actually so enjoyable. And I would 100% recommend if you want to dip your toe into nonfiction, into anthropological works. With the next book, we are back to my roots as a fiction lover. This is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And I have to say, I'd been wanting to read this book for years, but I kept putting it off. And I don't know why I did, because the second I read the opening sentences, I was absolutely hooked. This book is, let me consult, a page-turner spanning multiple generations about a pair of black twins, Desiree and Stella, in the Deep South in the 20th century. They run away and get separated, and then one of them chooses to pass for white. Just absolutely fascinating. It really draws you in. I could not put this book down. It was truly incredible. It talks about passing in all its forms, not just in race, but also in gender, the ways in which we all pass, if I'm trying to be really philosophical about it. But it was just absolutely incredible. I could not recommend this book enough. There is a really extensive cast of characters, which can often get confusing, and if the author does not handle it well, you won't really be attached to any of the characters, but I found myself attached to all of them. You felt for all of them, even the morally gray ones, or rather, especially the morally gray ones. If you love historical fiction, which I do, I absolutely recommend, but it does take place over the course of many years, so it pushes into the modern day as well. It's just incredible. I don't know why I didn't pick it up sooner, but I absolutely recommend The Vanishing Half. It's so cinematic. I really feel like they should make it into a movie. Side note, I also read kind of what's considered the companion novel to it, which is Passing by Nella Larson, written in the 20s. It felt really ahead of its time, I guess, which makes sense. So I would recommend definitely reading The Vanishing Half and Passing. They're both really good. The next book I'm going to be talking about, I know I said I wouldn't play favorites, but this might be my favorite of 2023. It is The Idiot by Elif Batuman. This book, wow, like I'm still thinking about it to this day. It is a hilarious and philosophical fictionalized autobiography about a Turkish-American Harvard student, Selin, and her one-sided love affair with both Russian literature and a certain Hungarian math major in the 1990s. This book. So Winnie recommended it to me, and she told me something before I read it, which was that It was something along the lines of she was so grateful that she got the ability to read, so she was able to read this book. And I was like, wow, I need to read it if I made you say that. And I am so glad I did. It is laugh out loud funny. Like, I was laughing out loud. Like, if I would read this in public, people would think I was crazy. It was so funny, so self-deprecating in its humor, but at the same time so relatable, so philosophical without being preachy or pretentious in the least. I loved Selin in all her awkward secondhand embarrassment moments. She goes to Harvard. There's all the trials and tribulations of her at Harvard with her roommates. She decides to study linguistics, so there's so many interesting quirks about language in the book, and that is definitely one of the things I adored about it. I love language. I love learning language. And to see her observations about language and the ways in which we use it. I've heard many criticisms of it saying, oh, nothing happened, it was so boring. And I see where you're coming from when you say that. I really do. Like, I'm not trying to say that this is the most action-packed novel ever. Not at all. But I do think it's very much the girls that get it kind of novel. And if you get it, you really get it. And I got it. And that's not to say that if you don't get it, like, you're missing the point. Not at all. I definitely understand that this book is not for everybody, but it's the kind of book that I love. And I made my mom read it, and she adored it as well. We always talk about it still. We always make references to Selin. And I really think it's worthy of being read, even if you find it boring. The Idiot, just amazing. It changed my way of looking at things. I just love it so much. The final book on my best books list is Just Kids by Patti Smith. I don't have my copy with me because I gave it to Gabs. I picked it up while on vacation. It is a memoir about rock and roll legend Patti Smith's mercurial relationship with controversial photographer Robert Mapplethorpe. So this was my first time reading a memoir by choice. I was immediately drawn into the story. It didn't matter that I was surrounded by gorgeous Spanish architecture, that I was, having the sense of delicious foods waft through the air. I had my nose in this book. Patti Smith is such a talented writer. Oh, what can I say? It's just about the relationship, at first romantic, then as friends, then she intersperses parts of her own personal life, but most of it is just about her relationship with Robert. And it's beautiful. It's heartbreaking. It'll make you laugh out loud. It'll make you sob. Like, I finished it while on the plane from Barcelona back to Montreal. And I'm telling you, I was alone. Okay, I was alone on that plane. Had I not been surrounded by a bunch of random strangers, the waterworks would have come out. I was doing my best to hold it together. It was just so life-changing. I could not recommend this book enough. I feel like I say that for every single book that I've read this year. It just tells you about their friendship, which was obviously so personal to them, but it kind of tells you about friendship and relationships and just love as a whole. I feel like love is the most common theme running through this book. Thanks, Miles. It was just so beautiful. I would recommend reading this and giving it to someone you love. You should annotate it and let them annotate it and then read it again and again and again. That is it for my best books of the year. And now we're going to be moving on to the worst-ish books of the year. Like I said, all of these books are still worthy of being read. They're still good in their own ways, but I just really did not enjoy them. The first one is maybe semi-controversial, but it's My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. I know if you check my Goodreads, I rated it 4 stars. That's because I was trying to seem intellectual and like a cool girl who reads. I read it on vacation in Aruba earlier this year in January, and I knew, even though it was called My Year of Rest and Relaxation, that it would not be restful or relaxing at all. I just really didn't enjoy it. It's basically set in New York in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's about this unnamed protagonist who is basically like a spoiled, rich, skinny white girl who has everything she wants, and it's still not enough. After the death of her 2 parents, she commences this ambition of sleeping for an entire year. And I knew it wasn't a beach read, and I didn't intend it to be. I love books that are dark and twisted and witty in a way that is very dark and twisted, but I felt like this book was kind of none of those things, not in the way that I wanted it to be. Maybe the fact that it was so hyped up in the cool girl book world, but I just found it disappointed me a lot. It just made me kind of like miserable. That's the best way I can describe it. It's a book that made me miserable. The next book on this list is Breasts and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami. I don't even know how to describe it. It's basically about like womanhood and how, you know, our anatomy and biology align with it, and how women are often reduced to their anatomy, even though having that anatomy does not make you a woman, and vice versa. It's about 3 women. There's the main character, Natsuko, who's a writer, and there's kind of 2 parts to the book. And I think my biggest issue with this book, other than the fact that it was kind of boring, was the pacing. So the first part is about them 3, and it's like tensions come to rise between the sisters and between the sister and her daughter. And I was like, okay, like I was getting into it despite the fact that it was a bit of a slow start. And it felt like an entire novel in itself, but I realized I was not even at 100 pages yet, and there were still, 300 pages left to go. And then that first part just ended kind of abruptly. And then the second part is much longer. It's about Natsuko trying to get pregnant as a single woman, so trying artificial insemination. That part is just like 3 times longer than the first part, 3 times as boring as the first part. And the pacing, like I said, just felt all off, and I just didn't enjoy it. I found it pretty boring. The next book on this list, the third book, is Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee. I've been wanting to read this book for like 2 years now. I've been wanting to read it since before it came out because, I mean, look at this cover. It's so cool. And I have to say, I have to preface Portrait of a Thief especially by saying this is one of the books that I actually did enjoy in this list. So I feel bad to be calling it one of the worst books I read this year. It really wasn't. I do have a certain bone to pick with it. Essentially, it's about a gang of 5 Chinese American university students and 1 dropout who are tasked by this shady Chinese company to steal 5 ancient relics that were stolen from China and that are now hosted in various Western museums across the world. So it's a heist novel. It's a novel exploring the effects of colonialism in the modern day. I would say the biggest thing that irked me about this book was not the story. It was a great, fun story, you know, felt like a movie. It was just the writing itself. Absolutely every single line felt like it had to be the most dramatic line in the book. But when every single line is super dramatic, the drama loses its dramatic effect. But it was still a fun story, like I said. I would definitely pick up anything else Grace D. Lee writes. I mean, she's literally, I think, in med school at Stanford, and she wrote this, so I'm not trying to act like I could write anything better. It is a debut novel as well. And finally, the last book on my quote-unquote worst books list is Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan. My mom sold it to me as a combination of Sally Rooney and Elif Batuman, the author of The Idiot. I definitely agree with her. It definitely was a combination of the two. It had Sally Rooney's style of making you miserable and talking about dysfunctional relationships, and Batuman's quirk, let's say, of incorporating different observations about language into the book. Essentially, it's about Ava, an Irish immigrant living in Hong Kong. She teaches children English, and it's about her, again, dysfunctional relationship with her not boyfriend Julian, who's a rich English banker also living in Hong Kong, and with Edith, who is a Hong Kong native who's also very wealthy and was educated at Cambridge and now lives in Hong Kong as a professional. I don't even know what she does. There's lots of social commentary in the book, and it tells you a lot about relationships between Irish and English people and kind of the tensions that still exist after colonization. It talks also about how Ava feels as a white person living in Hong Kong and this kind of like neo-colonialist sort of position that she's in. Again, this book wasn't bad, but I did definitely find myself, wading through it. It was just, I didn't really feel anything for Ava. I didn't feel good for her, didn't feel bad for her, wasn't really rooting for her, wasn't rooting against her. I guess it's just about a girl in her 20s being lost halfway across the world. I don't know, the best thing I can say about it was the social commentary, but I feel like there should be more to a novel than just what it says about the world. It has to say something new as well, maybe. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I hope you enjoyed this new kind of video. It's very different for me. As you know, I'm used to not being in front of the camera and not talking. Let me know if you would want me to do any more videos recommending books, talking about books. Okay, I think that's Sienna telling me to stop filming because she's cracking out the viola. So, bye guys. Thanks so much for watching again. I can't wait to see you next week, and I really hope you enjoyed this video and it wasn't too boring. Love you so much. I'll see you soon.